Talking about the use of women in modern culture is always tinged with higher meaning, like you want to push an agenda in one direction or another, and a great way of doing that is by talking about video games. I don't really want to do that today, it sounds complicated. If you ask the wrong people, you get a sense that women aren't properly represented in video games, and I can almost see that side of the argument, but the best rebuttal would be the shortlist for this video. Honestly, I didn't expect much to work with, but the more you look into it, the more you realize that there are many strong women doing some pretty awesome things in video games of all shapes and sizes. And this is only a top 5. Some jobs are harder than others, that's fine. What makes a good female protagonist though? That's the million-dollar question where the answer differs from person to person, and wrapping your head around it in a way that doesn't piss off at least one group of people is tricky business. For me, you're looking for a protagonist who exhibits all the right heroic traits, acts as a dominant force within their game, and exists as a relatable character for the player, who happens to be female. I mean, when you put it that way, it's all very simple. I don't know what people want, and you're not allowed to know what I want, because this is a family show. When you see someone talk about video game protagonists doing a good job within their video game, there's a surprising amount of love for playable characters who don't say a damn thing. You can get a lot out of a blank slate protagonist by using them as an insert for the player and effectively a window into this world, but I find that the best silent protagonists exist in environments where interactions aren't necessary. Like the Limbo Kid. Not a lot of people to talk to, so you get a lot of your story beats through non-verbal means, which feels less like blatant exposition when it happens. Usually technology forces a character to stay silent until the developers can make a game that lets them talk, but Metroid has stayed this way for a long time, and for a damn good reason. Silent protagonists really thrive in settings where silence makes sense. Samus journeys around the alien planet of interest, blowing up monsters and plants, and none of them were going to give you the time of day. Does this mean that Samus's character can't really come through as her own? Not exactly. Metroid and Samus Aran benefit immensely from the core gameplay and how Samus interacts with the world around her, not changing all that much since the first game. After all, you break down most Metroid games and you get the same basic premise. Intergalactic bounty hunter travels to an alien planet and then proceeds to fucking annihilate everything on it. All without saying too much. The fact that she's a woman came as a surprise in 1986 since there was no indicating factors, but there's no reason why she couldn't have been, other than a lack of women in starring roles at that time, but she's acted as the pioneer ever since, going about her business with minimum fuss and the occasional, yeah, I'm fucking awesome. She's like Boba Fett from Star Wars, she just gets the job done. Sounds great, doesn't it? But if she's capable of so much, how did she only barely make it onto this video? Very simple, the pus-filled elephant in the room by the name of Other M, where Samus becomes a horrendous unintentional parody of how to make a female protagonist. The strong silent character suddenly becomes this weak-willed mess who's hanging off her former commanding officer, seeking approval before doing anything useful, and breaking down at the worst possible times, all while telling the player every minute thought that pops into her head. I'd go as far as to say that Samus in Other M is one of the worst protagonists I've seen in a game, but fortunately, she's used well enough in other games to counteract most of it. Hopefully we see a revival in Samus Returns and Prime 4. Somehow I think we will. With female protagonists in particular, there's an added layer of complexity when it comes to designing them. With a guy, you can stack muscles on top of each other, give him a gun, and you're basically there. Not sure you can do this with women. Could you do this with women? That sounds like a debate point for people who are smarter than me. Sexuality versus practicality. Quite a big minefield that can cause a few problems if it doesn't work with the nature of the character. The bikini armor. Lara Croft's inception came about from wanting to put an Indiana Jones type character into a video game without making it too derivative, hence why she's called Lara Croft and not Nathan Drake. She came about as a counter to stereotypical female characters of the time who can control a situation, overcome adversity, and steal a lot of awesome shit from tombs and ruins. She also had her breasts increased by 150% in the design stage by accident, but the team decided to keep it. which is fun, but doesn't help her character. Not that kind of video. So Samus was the first, but Lara Croft was, and still kind of is, the iconic female protagonist. She got a bunch of movies. First one, she was played by Angelina Jolie, so she must be doing something right. The question that I come back to is whether or not something like this can match its iconic status with quality, and yeah. The early games were a little shaky because they're old and because character traits were an afterthought when stacked up against massive boobs. The 90s were a fun time, but recently the Tomb Raider games have grown up. Sure, they changed Lara Croft from an intrepid adventurer who explores dangerous crypts to someone who gets knocked over a lot and eventually murders most of the island to do heroic things, but bizarrely, considering what I've just said, they made Lara Croft feel a lot more realistic. I'm not going to say that the 2013 reboot is how to do an origin story, but it helps make the character of Lara Croft a lot more convincing in later games canonically. With someone this athletic, intelligent, resourceful, wealthy, you need to see them faced with adversity. Life is never that cushy. Public perception of Lara Croft seems to come from two angles, one being that she's awesome for pushing the envelope and being this agent for change in the video game industry, but also she's got exaggerated features and that can be seen as demeaning and exploitative. I'd argue that she's a really good representative of both worlds, something that everyone can enjoy. She's an inspiration and eye candy. Isn't that what we all strive for? I'm very hesitant to include any character whose gender comes down to personal preference at the time, because this is only viable within a game's narrative if gender doesn't matter. A little different to Samus from earlier because she's a deliberate subversion of expectation. In lots of other games you get a choice of gender for the protagonist to help drive home a bit more immersion. Besides, I think it's a bit like cheating to include, say, FemShep from Mass Effect, considering that there's a male equivalent who does the same job. Character creation often throws up uncontrollable variables, which is partly why I'm concerned that Beyond Good and Evil 2 will let you create your own protagonist. Mostly though because it sounds like they're letting a character as strong as Jade just slip by. I forget how good this game is sometimes, especially for 2003. That time period is important because in the 14 years that have followed, we've definitely seen a shift towards encouraging player choice, hence the character creation options. But Jade's strong characterization really made Beyond Good and Evil the great game that it was. A compassionate photojournalist who approaches the problems on her home planet with suspicion and determination. Her character has an interesting and relatable contrast to it when faced with conflict. She runs an orphanage for kids displaced by war, but happily strides into battle against the bad guys in order to help the freedom fighters. Everything about Jade promotes her warm personality towards the good parts of the world around her. The photojournalist bit manifests itself as a camera that can document wildlife on the planet as well as help Jade with the resistance part of her job. And all of it seems believable and attainable, minus the pig man for a partner thing. There's nothing in Jade's character that feels out of left field, like superhuman strength. You gotta be sneaky and pick your fights wisely, which in turn plays into the overall feeling of immense satisfaction that surrounds this game. The sequel is in fact a prequel with No Man's Sky levels of procedurally generated star systems and no Jade. Arguably a risk they don't need to take. I mentioned a bit earlier that the design of a female protagonist needs to work within the tone of the game and the character traits given to her. There's no point in giving her a skimpy outfit if she just walks around all the time really nervously. There's a bit of a disconnect there. But there is a way of doing that correctly with the right character. You can make sexualization work very well. And if, off of the back of that statement, your mind doesn't immediately go to Bayonetta, I'd just play some more video games, they're a lot of fun. Perception of Bayonetta and everything that her character entails has fluctuated a lot, and I think it's down to various people trying to work out what's going on here. Not a protagonist for those with a nervous disposition or an aversion to someone punishing their enemies in aggressively sexual ways. Bayonetta, through character tropes and physical design, is way more confident in her own circumstances than any one protagonist should be. Like, the typical hero will find problems that they need to overcome, but it never feels like Bayonetta is too far out of her comfort zone. Instead, you're treated to two games where she just fucks around, having a fun time in the process. What a coincidence, so am I. We need more games like that. And even better, Bayonetta's arrogance in the face of great difficulty is reflected pretty much perfectly in how you play this game. Bayonetta having such a lackadaisical approach to dealing with the bad guys is absolutely how it feels to be in control of a character, where it feels like you spend more time experimenting with combos than worrying about what enemies might do to you. And these games do have their challenging moments, but it never feels like something that Bayonetta shouldn't be able to handle if she's this cocky with basically everything else. Which is a potentially dangerous precedent to be setting, but I think it works. She doesn't even need to breathe through her skin to get there, she's just that self-assured. You've got a protagonist that effectively goes with, yeah, I'm hot, what the fuck are you gonna do about it? And it could have only come out of Japan. We don't take these kind of risks in the West. Maybe we should. In any video game, lining up the protagonist's goal with that of the player is really important, but not necessarily all that attainable. It all depends on the genre, really. Usually a player will approach a certain game knowing what they want to get out of it, and it'd be nice if the game could link that into the narrative somehow. Horror games don't stand a chance. I don't think any protagonist is investigating a haunted mansion because they seek the adrenaline. But there are a few genres where some clever writing can make relating to the protagonist so much easier. How do you make an adventure game line up with a playable character? You make exploration the #1 priority. Horizon Zero Dawn came out at a tricky time when people were salivating over Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Nintendo Switch, which meant that, in a small way, it was overshadowed, at least short term. I know where my priorities were in early March, and it did take me a little while to get through Horizon Zero Dawn. It's still really fun though, despite some heavy-handed use of symbolism and ideologies. But what this game absolutely nailed is the characterization of the protagonist Aloy, how she interacts with the world around her, and how her goals line up perfectly with the players. Aloy has been sheltered most of her life, forced to live away from tribes because the religion of the moment says she has to. So she seeks out a sense of belonging and mistrust the religion that put her in this situation in the first place, while also trying to understand how most of the world works. She has believable goals and learns her skills in believable ways. A little slow on pacing, but it's worth it in the end. The way in which Aloy's objectives line up with the players is equal parts simple and outstanding, while also working really well with the genre. An open world game is made to be explored, traversed from whatever angle you want, being able to go where you want, whenever you want. When someone says to Aloy that she can't go to a place, the contrarian inside the player and Aloy says, fuck you, I do what I want. I'll blow up these dinosaurs, I'll explore these mountains. The player will do what the game wants because it comes naturally. And that's not hard to do in a game, but it certainly is rare, especially in an open world game. Aloy looks at the world in front of her with confusion and curiosity, and both of those drive the player to do the exploring that the game wants you to do. Motivation is what makes a character stand out from the rest, and with an agreeable personality that helps to streamline the journey, Aloy stands as a pretty good model to follow. The story doesn't have to fight with the gameplay. This is RabbidLuigi, and in a weird way, Aloy functions like a blank slate protagonist without being one. When you have a character that has no personality, you insert some of what you would want into that space. With Aloy, she already has the traits that you would want in a game where exploration is fun and important. Generally speaking, the player doesn't need encouraging to play a game in a certain way, but when the protagonist reinforces it, it's like swimming with the current. Have you got an idea that you'd like me to turn into a countdown? Let me know in a comment down below, and make sure you check out my Twitter, where I'll be turning the best submissions into a poll where you can then decide the best topic. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.